Take an ordinary sheet of paper, the kind from your printer, and slide it into a seam in the wall of some old building. It goes in easily. The gaps are inches wide, with mortar, the work of a person laying stones by eye. Now picture a wall where that sheet doesn't go in, anywhere, not into a single seam, for hundreds of feet, between blocks weighing tens of tons, each a different irregular shape, and the line between them thinner than a hair. You run your palm across it and feel no joint. Your eye says the blocks are separate. Your finger says they're one solid piece. That's a description of a modern laser-guided cutting machine. Except it isn't a machine. These walls are 500, 1,000 years old, made by people with no electricity, no iron tools, not even the wheel. Today we'll walk through 9 places like this: an object that predicts eclipses, a temple carved from a mountain top down, a city built on the ocean, a stone too heavy for even its carvers to move.
And here's what I promise. By the end, you'll look at your own ancestors with completely different eyes. The real surprise isn't in the stones, it's in who the people who left them actually were. 1. The Antikythera Mechanism, a computer 1,500 years too early. Let's start with an object that fits in the palm of your hand, the cleanest candidate for a thing that shouldn't have existed. In 1901, Greek sponge divers pulled a lump of corroded bronze off a shipwreck near the island of Antikythera. Nobody looked twice. There were marble statues nearby. The metal was set aside, and as it dried, it cracked. And in one of those cracks, an archaeologist spotted something that could not be there: a neatly cut, toothed gear. The shipwreck dates to around the 1st century BC, when Rome was still at war with Carthage. No mechanical clocks, no printing press, no gunpowder. And inside this thing, around 30 bronze gears in a flat, multi-layered mechanism. You set the date, turn a handle, and it shows the position of the sun and moon. The lunar phase predicts solar and lunar eclipses decades ahead, even tracks the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. A model of the heavens in your pocket. Inside, there's even a part engineers call a differential gear, and the next one known to science doesn't appear until the 16th century AD. Between this Greek box and its repeat lie over 1,600 years of emptiness, in which humanity builds nothing even close. And here's where the real unease begins. Someone on a small island could build precision machinery the rest of the world would take 1,500 years to reach, and then the skill vanished. Not passed on, not written down, not a single second example in over a century of digging. A civilization invented a work of genius that outran its age by a millennium and a half, and lost it so cleanly it's as if someone deleted the file.
The Antikythera Mechanism is proof that our ancestors were smarter than we assume, and that knowledge is mortal. A civilization can know something and then forget. 2. The Serapeum at Saqqara, 24 empty 100-ton safes. From Greece to Egypt. But forget the pyramids of Giza for a minute. Come underground with me to Saqqara, to a place called the Serapeum. In 1850, the archaeologist Auguste Mariette dug down to a sealed entrance so tight they had to blast their way in. Inside were galleries cut into the bedrock, running into darkness for hundreds of feet. And in the side niches stood 24 giant granite sarcophagi. About 13 feet long, over 10 tall, each weighing 70 to 100 tons, with lids of around 30. One box with its lid is heavier than a fully loaded passenger jet. The inner walls are polished almost to optical flatness, the corners close to perfect right angles. In one of the hardest stones on Earth, worked by oil lamp inside a cramped box where one wrong move ruins it. And when the sarcophagi were opened, they were empty. No mummies, no gold. Why build a perfect 100-ton safe and leave it empty?
The accepted version, tombs for the sacred Apis bulls. But the real mystery isn't the carving, it's the logistics. The passages are so narrow that in places 2 people can't pass, and the gap between a sarcophagus and the wall of its niche is a matter of inches. No room for a lever, no room for a worker to push. How did they bring a 100-ton box into a corridor barely wider than the box, turn it on a right angle, lower it below floor level, and cap it with a 30-ton lid, with no cranes and no room to even apply force? And notice, the giant's version makes it worse. A giant in that cramped niche would have it even harder. The tightness screams the opposite. All of it was built for ordinary-sized people. People who could do what we, with all our machines, still can't. So how do you think they lowered them in? I've got my guesses, but I want to read yours. Drop them in the comments. Professionals have lost sleep over this spot, so any sober theory is worth its weight in gold. 3. Kailasa Temple at Ellora. A temple carved from a mountain, top down. Off to India, where the logic of construction is turned upside down. A normal building grows from the bottom up. The Kailasa Temple wasn't built. It was carved. Out of a single solid rock from the top down, closer to sculpture than construction. Picture a sculptor cutting away everything that isn't the figure, except here the figure is an entire temple complex as tall as a 9-story building, with columns, halls, and life-sized carved elephants, every detail part of one monolith. Nothing to assemble. Everything had to be foreseen, and exactly the right amount of stone removed. To free it, around 200,000 tons of rock were cut out and hauled away, with zero margin for error, since you can't glue back a chip off a stone elephant's trunk. By some estimates, the bulk was done in a few decades, tens of tons of stone cut and carried off every single day. And again the temptation rises, lasers, lost machines. But the real answer makes the temple more human and grander for it. Gravity worked for the builders. They dropped the stone down as they dug. They drilled holes, drove in dry wooden wedges and soaked them. The wood swelled and split the rock cleanly. And above all, the patron had a resource we don't: people and time. Thousands of stonecutters working across generations with a faith worth giving a life for. Kailasa proves that discipline and belief in the right conditions are mightier than any machine. 4. Sacsayhuamán. Walls that survived dozens of earthquakes. Now Peru, the hill above Cusco, where our paper test becomes genuinely eerie. The walls are built from polygonal blocks, the largest up to 200 tons. No mortar, and they're fitted so tightly that not a sheet of paper, not a knife blade, in places not even a human hair, will go into the joint. Thousands of blocks, each its own shape, each ground to fit its neighbors like a living puzzle. When the Spanish arrived, they took apart some walls for their colonial city, but left the lowest blocks, which they simply couldn't budge. Conquerors with gunpowder and steel couldn't dismantle what people with stone hammers had built. And here's what astonishes engineers now. The corners are rounded, the shapes interlock, the walls lean inward. Not an aesthetic whim, but an engineering solution. Modern modeling shows this polygonal masonry absorbs an earthquake's energy. Rectangular blocks spread apart and collapse, but these stones shift during the tremor and settle back. Over 500 years and dozens of quakes they held, while the colonial masonry beside them crumbled. Architects study this seriously today, meaning we are learning from people who had no written blueprint. How, without iron and without the wheel? They didn't cut the stone, they pounded and ground it with quartzite hammers, tiny strikes at a precise angle, hour after hour, and replicas made that way produced the same tight joint. No alien machines needed. But the open question remains, how did they reach that precision on thousands of blocks, all built into an earthquake-proof system? We understand the principle. Where the people found that much precision and inhuman patience, nobody fully understands. 5. Baalbek. Stones, not even the ones who carved them could move. If Sacsayhuamán is about precision, Baalbek in Lebanon is about sheer weight. In the foundation of the Roman Temple of Jupiter lie 3 slabs called the trilithon, each around 800 tons, 60 feet long, raised and set into a wall several feet above the ground, without mortar. 800 tons is the weight of 2 fully loaded wide-body jets set with a mason's precision. And in a quarry nearby still lie monoliths never hauled out. One found in 2014, estimated at around 1,650 tons. The largest worked stone block in human history. These blocks were carved and abandoned, most likely because they physically couldn't move them. The Romans knew how to move heavy things, capstans, rollers, thousands of workers, and a block of several hundred tons was within their power, at the limit. But for the 1,000-ton monoliths, the honest answer is, we don't fully know how they meant to move them. Maybe they didn't. They started, judged the task soberly, and stepped back. And in that retreat is the most human thing about Baalbek. A 1,600-ton stone abandoned in a quarry isn't a trace of superpower. It's a trace of a limit. If beings for whom 1,600 tons was nothing had done this, why abandon the job halfway? The unfinished stone proves these were people. People who dared to try the impossible, which is exactly why they deserve more admiration than any invented titans. 6. Derinkuyu, an underground city 18 stories down. From weight to depth. Turkey, Cappadocia, 1963. A man knocks down a wall in his basement, and behind it opens a dark tunnel. Behind it, one of the largest underground cities in the world. Derinkuyu. Not a couple of caves, a multi-level metropolis descending 18 stories to about 280 feet. By estimates, around 20,000 people could live here at once with their livestock, living quarters, kitchens, wineries, oil presses, meeting halls. And the most astonishing part is the ventilation, fed through shafts so skillfully that from the surface, the city was impossible to detect. The enemy walked over people's heads with no idea that thousands were breathing and praying beneath his boots. Why live underground like a mole? The imagination jumps in, a bunker, a shelter from something that came from the sky, especially seeing the corridors you pass, one at a time, and the half-ton millstone doors that sealed from the inside. But the earthly explanation is no less dramatic. These lands were a corridor for invasions for centuries, and the local rock, volcanic tuff, is soft underground and cuts easily, but hardens almost like concrete in open air. Perfect for a hidden refuge. When an enemy appeared, an entire population vanished underground and rolled the millstones over the entrances. Doors that lock only from the inside and corridors for one person at a time aren't defense against aliens. They're brilliant fortification against a very earthly enemy with a sword, who can only come down that corridor alone and straight on to a defender's spear. Derinkuyu is a monument to the ingenuity of people backed into a corner and their desperate will to live. 7. Nan Madol, a stone Venice on a reef, and history's first gilded cage. The Pacific. The tiny island of Pohnpei. Locals warn visitors, don't linger in the ruins of Nan Madol after sunset. Nan Madol is the only ancient city in the world built not on land, but on the water. 92 artificial islands on a coral reef linked by canals. The Venice of the Pacific. The walls rise as high as a 3-story house, built from thousands of basalt logs, natural hexagonal columns that nature casts as lava cools.
Each weighs between 5 and 50 tons. In total, hundreds of thousands of tons of stone, on the same order as the Great Pyramid. And here's the contrast that takes your breath away. The Great Pyramid was built by all of Egypt, a state of millions. The population of Pohnpei is estimated at best in the tens of thousands. No metal, no wheel. And they somehow brought colossal basalt blocks from quarries on the far side of the island and laid them in the water on a reef under the ocean's blows. The archaeologists ran experiments and found there was no point hauling overland. The islanders used the ocean, slinging the columns under rafts where stone loses weight, then raising them up ramps with palm trunk levers. The genius of Nan Madol isn't anti-gravity, it's logistics. And what it was built for is disturbingly modern. Nan Madol was neither temple nor fortress. It was a gilded cage. The ruling dynasty herded the local chiefs and their families there under the guise of honor. In reality, under control. On the islands, there was no fresh water and no land to grow food. Everything came from the mainland. Plan a rebellion, and they cut off the supply. And you die of thirst in your own stone palace. One of history's first cities designed as an instrument of total dependence. These builders understood power and control as well as any modern political operator. Not naive savages, very intelligent, very calculating people. 8. Yonaguni, a sunken city or a masterpiece of nature. Japan, its westernmost point, the island of Yonaguni, 1986. A diving instructor looking for hammerhead sharks stumbles underwater onto a huge stone mass resembling a stepped pyramid. Even terraces, right angles. Something like a road skirting it. The object runs about 500 feet. And here's the intrigue. It's underwater, and at that depth, this coast was last dry land around 10,000 years ago at the end of the Ice Age. If it's man-made, it's older than the Egyptian pyramids by thousands of years, and everything we know about the start of civilization needs rewriting. Hence the talk of a Japanese Atlantis. And here I have to be honest, because the scientific community is seriously split. Some are convinced Yonaguni is entirely natural. The local sandstone splits along straight lines, and strong currents washed out the debris, leaving even faces, steps, angles. Nature is remarkably good at man-made forms. But there's a nuance even cautious skeptics take seriously. Details harder to blame on water. Round depressions at a slab's edge, a rock resembling a carved head. Most likely, the truth is in the middle, and more interesting than either extreme. Nature made the rough draft, an even platform, and people who lived here before the ocean rose refined it. If that's true, then under the water lie the traces of people who walked there 10,000 years ago, before any written history. You don't need an Atlantis for Yonaguni to be a wonder. 9. Gunung Padang. Why the most honest story is the most interesting. And finally, a site that shows how the great mysteries of the past are born and tested. The island of Java, the hill of Gunung Padang. For centuries, locals climbed it to pray, taking it for a sacred hill with old stones. Then geologists came with ground-penetrating radar and found, beneath the soil, not a natural hill, but a clearly man-shaped stepped structure, terraces reinforced with thousands of stone columns. And then came the thing I saved this site for. A team published a paper claiming, by radiocarbon dating, that the structure was over 20,000 years old, older than the Ice Age, older than any pyramid. The internet blew up,
proof of a forgotten civilization the textbooks hid from us. And I understand the pull. I want a lost golden age to lie under that hill too. But in 2024, the journal retracted the paper, citing a serious error. They had dated soil samples not connected to any human traces. One critic put it brilliantly. If you take soil from deep beneath a parliament building and it's 40,000 years old, that doesn't mean Parliament is 40,000 years old. The age of the dirt under a building is not the age of the building. And here's what was left when the emotions settled. Something real and astonishing. The bricks of Gunung Padang are columnar basalt, those same hexagonal columns nature casts as lava cools. Remember Nan Madol? Same material, the other side of the world. Ancient people didn't build the hill from scratch. They reworked the landscape, dragging thousands of heavy columns to reinforce the slopes, and the earliest stages are thousands of years old. The real mystery isn't lasers. It's people. How did a society with no king, no state, no machinery of coercion work on one sacred place for centuries? I showed you both the loud version and its honest debunking on purpose. Because even when the sensation collapses, what's left is a real wonder. Real people. Real colossal labor. A real unsolved riddle. And that wonder only gets sturdier once we remove the fiction. We've traveled from a bronze box the size of a book to a stone weighing 1,600 tons, from a city 18 stories underground to one built on the ocean. They're scattered across continents and millennia, but one thing binds them. Each makes you feel how narrowly we picture the human being who lived before us. We were taught a comfortable picture. Progress is a straight line upward. Primitive ancestors with clubs at the bottom, us at the summit with our phones. But everything we've seen says the opposite. People who calculated eclipses with bronze gears, carved a mountain like a sculpture with no margin for error, built walls that survived earthquakes which flattened the buildings of their colonizers. These are not primitive ancestors. They're masters who in some ways surpassed us. They had no machines, but they had what we are desperately short of: time, patience, and the willingness of thousands to labor toward one goal for generations, without expecting to see the result in their lifetime. And one more thing, knowledge that knew how to disappear, born and perfected, and then gone with the culture that made it. That's the soberest thought in the whole subject. Progress isn't obliged to move only forward. Knowledge is mortal. A civilization can know and then forget. And here's the question that won't let me go. If entire skills vanished so completely that we're left with one fragment and 1,000 guesses, how much vanished without leaving even a fragment? And what, out of everything you and I can do today, will one day become an inexplicable find just like these? Picture an archaeologist 10,000 years from now, turning a fragment of our world over in his hands, just as baffled, not understanding how we even came up with it. Will he think us primitive, or decide, like us, that somebody must have helped? Do you think we underestimate our ancestors, or overrate these mysteries? Tell me what country you're from and which side you're on. Argue it out in the comments. Professionals lose sleep over these exact stones, so there are no stupid opinions here. See you next time.